3, 2, 1.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of GrokTALK, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GrokTALK.com. We are your feared, extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GrokTALK.com.
GrokTALk.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Granite Grok's GrokTALK here in beautiful Concord, New Hampshire, where it's nice and chilly. It's cold outside. It's 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 10th, 2015. We'd like to thank Darlene Pollock from New Hampshire Right to Life for coming in and filling us in on some of the things going on in New Hampshire on the issue of life. And we'd like to remind you that Kevin Kervick will be joining us in the next segment to talk about recent statements by the SNHU president about social justice. For now, we would like to welcome to the program Jason Sorens. Dr. Sorens is a lecturer in the government department at Dartmouth College and received his PhD in political science. There's a political science at Yale. There is a nice Freudian slip for me. Thank you so much for saying that. He's got a new program that he's working on that we want to start with. I know people are going to want to talk about the Free State Project, but we met him a few weeks back, and he brought this up, and we want to get it some attention. It's called Ethics and Economics in Education of New England. Dr. Sorens, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Steve and Skip. Thanks for having me on.
Sure, great to have you here. So, you've got this E3NE thing going on here. Why don't you tell our listeners what this is all about?
Yeah, so Ethics and Economics Education of New England. We are going into high schools starting in just a couple of weeks and running a program educating them in moral philosophy and economic principles. So we'll be bringing in great thinkers in political thought like John Locke and John Stuart Mill, people who really defend liberty and individual rights. And we are also bringing in economic principles, so Henry Hazlitt, Milton Friedman, people like that who've really expressed in a deep but accessible way very important economic ideas about how markets work, how prices work, why profits are good in the economy, things like that. And our view is that economic education is really important for citizenship. If you don't understand economic principles, then you're not going to understand how to hold politicians accountable for their economic policies. But in addition, economics requires a moral background. If you've just got economics without the moral background, you might be tempted to just think that, well, economic pragmatism is the only criteria for evaluating things, and we think that that's mistaken. That we need to understand the background of human dignity, of individual rights, natural rights, that sort of circumscribe where economics has its domain.
Okay, so you've been teaching at the university level for, about 12 years, I think you said?
That's right.
And as you've developed this program, you're going to be taking it into high schools. I've since read all these authors that you're talking about, but I never had any clue who they were when I was in high school, so I came to this brilliant thought much later in my life. How successful do you think you've been at adapting this material for that audience?
I think we've been very successful. I have been teaching at the college level, so this is a new thing for me, bringing it to the high school level. I participated in a program like this in high school, so I know it can work. This is an age when students are open to new ideas. They're starting to be open to society around them. They're starting to want to figure out politics and economics and social forces, and this is a way to make that world make sense to them. And so it's going to be very unclass-like. We're going to try to appeal to the students by making it as different as possible from a typical classroom experience. So it's not going to be lecture. It's going to be discussion-based. They will get free books, sort of classic works in the field. I'll come in with questions that will provoke them, like, have you ever heard people say that we're too concerned about rights and not our duties? And that's a common thing that people say, and then we'll try to figure out, well, does that make sense? And it turns out that the only way to understand rights is that rights are duties. So there's really no distinction between rights and duties. We'll talk about things like, have you ever heard people say that to boost the local economy, you should buy local? And we'll talk about the problems with that, and that's the way of sort of introducing comparative advantage. So these are things that are sort of hot topics. They're things that will appeal to them. They'll see that people are talking about these things and they want to make sense of them. So at a very kind of introductory level, we'll show what the fallacies are with kind of make work economics, like the idea that, well, let's just give people jobs and jobs is the appropriate focus of economics. Let's try to focus on boosting demand. Those sorts of economic fallacies that are sort of popular. The idea that we can just increase spending, and that's what's going to create economic growth in the long run. Well, no economist believes that. Not even traditional Keynesians believe that increasing spending and increasing demand is the way to long-run economic growth. So we'll show them that it's all about exchange. It's all about productivity, being able to make more, developing technology, developing exchange over a broader number of people. That's where economic growth comes from. And another incentive for students to participate is that at the end of the year, they get to participate in a speech competition where they can win college scholarships. So we're touting four main advantages of this program to high school students. First, relaxed discussions with a Dartmouth professor, and a lot of them are interested in applying to Dartmouth or other selected schools, and this is a way of kind of having a little bit of that access to the faculty that they'll have in the future. They also get free books. They get a chance to practice their public speaking skills, and they can win some scholarship money. So I'm excited about it.
Dr. Sarnes, this is Skip, and I want to say thank you for coming on the show. It was good to meet you as well a couple of weeks ago, finally. I want to tag into the first word of this, the ethics part. And even though I knew that you were coming on the show, I didn't realize when I read this following title from Instapundit of a post that I knew you were coming on the show. As many as 64 Dartmouth College students, including some athletes, could face suspension or other disciplinary measures for cheating in an ethics class this past fall. Glenn adds in, I love that it was an ethics class. Yeah. And, what you were describing about teaching the high school kids, I could blithely pass off and say, well, how about some of the folks at your own university as well, and a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But, our founding fathers said that, our form of government is only for a virtuous people. And I think you're right in stating that economics just can't be about, government spending, creating jobs and all that. There is the ethical standpoint that seems to be disappearing here in American life. From my standpoint, the further and further we go to being merely a secular society, that a lot of people who used to receive at least some ethics or some moral background from strong families, from church, and I know a lot of liberals will get upset at that, or secularists, and maybe we'll hear from the militant atheists on this. We like to annoy people. But without a grounding of absolute morals and ethics, how long will our economic system last? I mean, you have to be able to trust people, but if you don't feel that you have to return that trust, what happens?
There you get to one of the key points which government is actually supposed to do. This is Mike, Jason. Which is to preserve the rule of law, to enable contracts and the enforcement of contracts without which the capitalist system simply cannot function. Sorry, back to you, Doctor.
Yeah, capitalism depends on a basis of virtues, honesty and integrity, probity, willingness to trust others who are trustworthy. So if you don't have those basics, then most of what goes on in business can't happen. I mean, most of what goes on in business is on a handshake basis. It's not based on contracts being enforced in the courts. Once that falls apart, once you are relying on the court system to enforce everything, every agreement, every deal in business, the costs explode, and you really can't have a working economy. But beyond that, I mean, if people don't have a strong sense of human dignity, of the value of every person, and of the strong objective moral obligations that that sort of attend upon that, then they're not going to respect freedom in the long run. And if you can't be a moral relativist and someone who respects freedom, because if you're a moral relativist, then well, what's wrong with North Korea or with the Islamist terrorists? So they kill people. Well, that's their value. Their value is to kill people. So we can't judge that. Right? So
One of the
that's a real big problem.
one of the questions you have in the handout that we got from you is, what moral obligations do businesses have? So what moral obligations do businesses have?
Yeah, I think, and again, this is not going to be me dictating to the students. It's more about a conversation, bringing up things.
Sure.
What about this? What about that? But my view is that businesses have an obligation to be honest with their customers, to not deceive them or mislead them, even by omission. I think that it's fine for a business to be solely focused on profit, so long as it's also respecting customers' rights and not trying to deceive them. I also think it's fine for a business to have objectives other than profit, obviously, because I've started a couple of nonprofits. So I don't think that businesses necessarily have an obligation to their so-called stakeholders, right? That businesses, even beyond maximizing profits and respecting people's rights, have to try to meddle in their employees' welfare or in the welfare of the cities in which they operate. And there is a kind of progressive theory out there of business ethics that businesses have an obligation to sort of maximize stakeholder value and not just shareholder value. But it's really unclear who is a stakeholder. Anyone affected by a business potentially is a stakeholder. And then once you do that, as Milton Friedman noted, you don't get the social benefits of capitalism anymore, because the social benefits of capitalism depend on businesses trying to maximize profit and thereby sending signals to the marketplace about what's needed. If the profit's high in an industry, that's a signal that, hey, make more of this. Additional firms, enter this industry. If we don't have those signals anymore, if businesses are pursuing some sort of muddled cloud of sort of objectives, then I think we put at risk some of the virtues of the free enterprise system.
All right, Dr. Storms, we're going to take a quick 60-second break. We'll be right back. Stay on the line.
Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at GerardAtLarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
I really can't say.
Baby, it's
cold outside.
We're gonna keep playing this because it's cold outside.
Baby, it's cold outside.
Is it cold? Is it cold in Lebanon, New Hampshire this morning?
It is, yes. Probably a little colder than in Concord.
Probably a little bit. Now, Skip, you said you had.
It was minus 19 in Guilford yesterday, day before.
Yeah.
When I first got up in the morning. My hydrogen, as I said earlier in the show, my hydrogen peroxide in my car's first aid kit froze solid.
That's cold. All right, so we are on the phone with Dr. Jason Sorens, who is a lecturer in government at Dartmouth College. We've been talking about E3NE, but I'm pretty sure some of our listeners are going to want to talk about the Free State Project a little bit, so maybe we can kind of... Go ahead, Skip. You had a question.
Actually, and I think Dr. Sorens started to bring this up on his own, where you started to talk about the social responsibility that seems to be put upon corporations, and you mentioned it was a progressive idea, and the idea of stakeholders versus shareholders, and the muddiness that's coming about, because I think that it is another step of the democratization effort to control corporations, and not democratization that anybody can participate and have a vote. Well, actually, that's what progressives want. If you notice, they want corporations to be controlled by the people, not by the owners, but by the people, which leads us more into a socialized state. The Free State Project, which I would have to say, even though all of us are pretty much transplants here to New Hampshire, we're here more for because of the live free. Oh gosh, no, I do not
Eat
work.
fries or die.
I do not work for Burger King or McDonald's. The live free or die. The live free or die ethic, and we see that in the Free State Project, where people just want to come here to be free, to live their lives, and sort of be part of the unspoken "just leave us alone" coalition. And we're very much in favor of the Free State Project, but we see a lot of the folks, and you probably know the infamous statement by New Hampshire State Representative Cynthia Chase of, well, we have to take away freedom so that they won't come here. Isn't this part and parcel and wrapped up into part of this program? Because we see the impetus for government to take over more and more, and I think when I read through the materials, this is more of, let's make this an individual. What are you going to do in the face of this? Giving people the information to be able to say, I have to be taking involved in this personally. I have to understand what my values are versus let's vote.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's about taking personal responsibility for one's own thoughts and actions and justifications, and I think education plays a big role in that. And it's what I mean by education there is not some sort of rote learning or indoctrination, but a willingness to question and take a skeptical disposition to arguments and actually think things through. And so that's what I'm doing with E3NE is trying to influence that next generation and get them to actually take a skeptical eye to some of these things that sound good, because socialism sounds good on paper. It sounds like, well, this is the unselfish way to do things. But in practice, of course, socialism ends up being the most selfish system, and ends up those with the political power determine how things go. And if you want access to resources, you need to have pull with the guys at the center. So it's the exact opposite of an unselfish system, but people don't realize that to start off with.
Yeah, I often, when I write on Granite Rock, I talk about the pillars of our capitalistic society and the pillars of our republic, and oftentimes the two are the same, the one of which is the rule of law. Not only in our personal lives do we depend upon that so that we are not held hostage by a capricious government, which I start to wonder about because there are too many laws to have the rule of law. But it also affects corporations, and we see when government makes those go haywire. I think back to the takeover of GM and Chrysler back in the early part of Obama's presidency when they, quote-unquote, tried to save them. And the other pillar being the right to private property, which in that case they completely trash the senior bondholders who should have had first go at the remains of a bankrupt GM, and we see the whittling away of that right to private property. Tell me, in this class that you do you talk about those two? Are they emphasized or just merely in passing are they mentioned? Because I think they're extremely important, but from your standpoint, where do they play a role in this class for high schoolers?
Yeah, private property rights are key, and they're a big part of this program. There's both a pragmatic case for property rights, which is that you're going to take care of something. You're going to try to make sure it has good long-run value if you own it. If you don't own it, if ownership is unclear, if everybody owns it, then no one has an incentive to take care of it. And that's what we see often with public lands. When access isn't controlled properly, they degrade very quickly. But private farms become very, very productive because if you own that property and the sort of the fruit of it, then you're going to try to take care of it. But there's also a moral case for private property, and that comes out of a lot of the philosophers of the Enlightenment, including Adam Smith, whose theory of moral sentiments, I think, is often overlooked in favor of the wealth of nations. But Adam Smith makes some key points about contrasting justice and beneficence, and he says, if something is a duty of justice, if you have a duty of justice to someone, then what an impartial spectator feels when observing a breach of that duty is a kind of resentment, right? If you kill somebody, if you take their stuff, if you defraud somebody, and we observe that, we think, hey, you don't deserve that. Those advantages are unjust. Those advantages that you took, we need to take them back from you. So we feel a kind of resentment against you. If you fail in your duty of beneficence, and if you fail to be beneficent to someone, we don't feel resentment towards you. Right? What would we think about someone who said, oh, you didn't give me a Christmas present this year. I resent you. I am going to take what's mine from you. You're a sociopath, right? That's crazy. But at the same time, being beneficent is still a duty. There's an important moral value to being beneficent, being benevolent to people, but it's not a duty of justice. It's a duty that we can only undertake when we have private property, when we have things that we have control over, and we can, out of the goodness of our heart, transfer rights to those things to people in need. And so when we do that, we're actually exercising virtue. We're not exercising virtue if everything is socialized and we're just, and people can take what they want. There's no virtue there. There's no virtue in being forced to be benevolent if it's not your choice. So one of the other points that will come up in our discussions is that, well, virtue is something that's really in a condition of your will, and so someone can't really force you to be virtuous. The government can't force people to be virtuous.
Yeah, no, I certainly believe that to be true, and yet that's what progressives seem to do. And Dr. Arthur Brooks, in his, I would say, startling book, "Who Cares More, Progressives or Liberals?" and he saw that conservatives gave more, not only of their money to charitable causes, but also of their time and other efforts. So, and you can't have that unless there's a profit and able to share in those profits. But I also call progressivism lazy. And I think it speaks to your point right here in that they want something for nothing on their own part. They want to feel good about accomplishing something, but that accomplishment usually comes because they've persuaded somebody in government to do something. I'll tell you, a great case of that was up in Laconia, where the local Dunkin' Donut shop had, built a brand new building on part of their land, and they let this old Victorian type house go into disrepair. Well, some busybodies and people who believe their nose extended through yours decided, well, that was a travesty to let this quote unquote historical building go into disrepair, that they need to save it. And they were kvetching in the paper all the time, well, the owners ought to be keeping it up. Somebody's got to take care of this. Somebody's got to do this. Somebody else has got to do that. And finally, a number of people wrote in, if you think so much of this building, pull the money out of your own pocket and take care of it and buy it and move it and all that stuff. No. This is for all of us. Do you cover any kind of an aspect like that in this class where, as you said, when everything's owned by everybody, it doesn't work? It's the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the core findings in economics. And how do you deal with the tragedy of the commons? Well, one solution is to privatize. If you can privatize. The other solution is to decentralize. So if for some reason you can't break the thing up into blocks of private property, you let the people who are intimately involved with that resource every day decide for themselves how to organize it. So in Maine, lobster fishermen have dealt with the tragedy of the commons in the lobster fishery by developing it's almost an informal system of property rights. The way it works is that there are particular spots in the ocean where each fisherman kind of has a property right, and you're not allowed to fish there if you don't have that kind of informal property right. These aren't legal property rights. This is just a custom that's developed, and they've managed to figure this out. What would be worse is for the federal government or someone to come in and say, okay, forget this informal arrangement that you've developed over generations. We're going to sweep that aside. We're going to impose a new regulatory scheme like catch limits or something. And
didn't that actually happen, Jason? That the federal government tried to get involved in the quota limits in Maine?
That may be. I did hear something about that. But what I'm thinking about here is the work of the Nobel Prize-winning political scientist Eleanor Ostrom, who researched how to govern the commons. And so she found in cases where you couldn't have pure privatization, decentralization, having local people decide things is best. And we've kind of gone the opposite route in this country, where the federal government has taken on more and more responsibilities at the expense of states and localities.
Dr. Sorens, I got to cut in on you here. We're running out of time. How do people contact you and get more information about E3NE?
Yeah, so our website is e3ne.org. And again, E3NE is short for Ethics and Economics Education of New England. So if you're a high school student, parent, if you work at a high school, we'd love to hear from you. We'll be expanding this program significantly in coming years. And all our contact information is there on the website, so we'd love to hear from you.
All right, great. Thank you so much for spending time with GrokTALK.
Thank you.
All right, that's the end of this segment. Kevin Kervick's in the studio. We will be right back with him in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen said, if you like your current health plan, you can keep it. That's not true, Senator. 22,000 New Hampshire citizens have been kicked off their insurance plans. Hospitals in Rochester, Concord, and Portsmouth, they aren't allowed to provide care under the exchange. Senator, you were wrong in your comments. You should apologize for your misleading remarks. I'm calling Senator Shaheen at 750-3004 and telling her I want my doctor back. You should too.
Paid for by saberpac.org, not authorized by any candidate or candidate committee.
We are struggling. Rising healthcare costs are part of the problem. Senator Jeanne Shaheen helped create this mess we're in. As a state senator, her bill chased 21 insurers out of our state. It reduced our choices, raised prices for New Hampshire families, and when Jeanne Shaheen supported Obamacare, it limited access to 10 of our 26 hospitals, reducing our choices again. Tell Jeanne Shaheen she's made healthcare worse. Few things are as important as finding the right doctor. And under Obamacare, that's harder than ever. Over a third of our hospitals no longer available. Our doctors no longer covered. Fewer choices, longer drives. No state has been harder hit than us. And even after watching it impact New Hampshire, Congresswoman Ann Custer still supports it. Call Ann Custer. Tell her Obamacare isn't working for New Hampshire.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
GrokTALK.